None of what we're talking about got captured.
None of it did?
None of it. No.
Jeez. Oh,
I
maybe that's what
know.
God wanted. Oh, well. We
That's
just
what
need to
God
know to
wanted.
check everything. Got to check
Didn't
it
want
now,
me to.
so.
Didn't want me to clarify my views.
Nope. You should get more hate.
Yeah. No. Thankfully, actually, comments have been predominantly nice. I mean, I don't see anything hateful, even when somebody comes and just says something that sounds like hateful towards religion. Doesn't seem hateful towards me.
Mm.
But yeah, no, it is funny because there are some people who are, I'm assuming, Gnostics who say, "Oh, thank you so much for bringing that up," but I don't really, in reality, don't know much about Gnosticism.
No, Gnosticism is in vogue because it gives an alternate way of looking at things. And in fact, it was the basis of the mythology of the movie The Matrix, is actually completely based in a Gnostic interpretation
That's
of reality.
fascinating. That's so interesting
Yeah.
because my episode 5 is pretty much like exactly the Matrix story, but not just the Matrix story. Any human history is always cyclically the same, right? There's some bad stuff happening, and then some power hungry, powerful people just collect enough power to cast oppression upon people or to brainwash people or to control people. Then someone courageous and smart and brave enough comes in, steps in, and kind of just tries to wake people up that they can too speak up and not take that. So to me, that's interestingly, that is the Bible. Like, this is why, even if during the years when I would call myself an atheist without realizing I'm not an atheist, like I was a very spiritual atheist, I always respected the book. I respected Christianity and respected the entire premise because I saw it as kind of a battle between good and evil, but perhaps not entirely verbatim the way Christians want to see it, as the battle between good and evil, right?
Right. I mean, when you start analyzing stories throughout history, you start seeing patterns. And this is something that Carl Jung talks about. This is something in Campbell's work, The Hero's Journey. He saw a certain particular pattern that was seen in all the stories. And there are patterns there. And the question is, why are there patterns? What do these patterns mean? And are they connected to our physical world? The idea of analyzing them is looking for what you call metaphysics, right? The physics beyond physics. Like, what are the archetypal patterns that exist in reality that cause or are reflected in our physical reality? And when you start to really get close and nail down those exact patterns, you start to see them reflected repeatedly in physical reality, in physics itself. And that's when you know you have true metaphysics, because it reflects itself in physical reality. And so that's the search of philosophy of metaphysics. That's how I ended up becoming Christian again, was I started to see these patterns repeated over and over in actual physical world, in everything from quantum physics to astrophysics and everything in between story wise. So we won't touch any of that much now, but I think as we go through these stories, we'll be touching on that eventually. And I think the viewer will start to pick up on what I mean by that if you're not quite following what we're talking about.
Yeah, and before we jump into Cain and Abel, I do want to say something about that, what you just said. And you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. That a little bit sounds almost as if these patterns are happening to us. In my opinion, we're causing the patterns. It's just human behavior, human greed, sin, lust, whatever it may be. Our human nature is causing these patterns because someone powerful and greedy or insecure and egotistical will seek power. And if they are successful or if they have enough resources, they will, grow bigger and bigger, and slowly just that power that controls people will be created due to, again, human nature. And then somebody steps in and breaks that chain, perhaps, and then everything starts over. But of course it starts immediately over because someone else now has the window to become that next so-called evil, right?
Right. Yeah. So the answer is it's both, right? The patterns are happening to us, and we are causal in patterns themselves. right? So
But
it
that
is a
how
dance or an
does that
interplay.
work?
What's that?
Oh, okay, go ahead. I was gonna say, how does that work? Because it's can't really be chicken and the egg.
Well, because in the same way that when two people dance, right? It looks
Uh-huh.
like it's one person, but there's really a leader and a follower. But at the same time, this calls back to the Garden of Eden, where it is described as a garden, not a jungle and not a city. And the idea of a garden is that you're participating in the growth of plants where you are deciding where they're going, but then God grows them for you. And so it's actually a participation between man and God, which is what this reality is. Like we have these patterns affecting us, but then we get to decide how we respond to those. And the way we respond are creating their own patterns. And so, like in Taoism, their word for that,
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate pattern was the Tao, the yin and the yang. And their salvation was finding a way to participate in the Tao without fighting against it. Right? That's the way that they
Mm-hmm.
described it. And we see the same description in Christian soteriology is that becoming one with God is learning how to participate in God's pattern, and so that you can actually emanate God, be a vessel by which God's pattern continues throughout the universe. So,
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. All right. So shall we get into Cain
yeah,
and
let's get
Abel?
into it. I have a lot to say, so hopefully we get
Okay,
this episode
that's
done
good.
in a decent time.
Hopefully within an hour. All right. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother, Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Hold on. Fat portions? So I'm not seeing things. It
That's
does say
correct.
fat portions.
Hmm.
And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. But for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it.
Should we stop
So
here?
this is a. Sure.
Okay.
So this is interesting because Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. So here's my raw. It always hits me in a funny way first, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm thinking, okay, like nowhere does it say that the fruit that Cain offered maybe just was not raised well, right? It's not about the quality of the fruit because you can have really bad gardener who produces bad fruit or just something that just doesn't look appetizing or edible, so it's just hence just not good. Or you can be a great gardener and produce a peach this big that's just juicy and delicious. So it's not talking about the skill in any way other than almost like God prefers lamb. Who doesn't prefer meat? So for me, it just hits it a little bit the wrong way. But although, of course, there's no room, regardless how it is, the answer is not to become jealous or angry. So it's just in that section for now. I'm just like, wait, like why you? Can you do more constructive criticism so the guy can get better? What's going on here?
So
You
clearly,
know,
God's not a vegan. That's the moral of the story: is God's not
that's
a vegan.
100%. So anyone who reads the Bible and becomes vegetarian or vegan, that's hard to understand.
But no, no, no. There's a lot going on here. Would you like me to start in a couple places? Because it is interesting,
Sure.
right? Because you have Cain, who's a tiller of the ground, which means he's a farmer. So you know, he
Ooh.
right, which means his offering is vegetables. And
Yes.
then you have Abel, who's a shepherd, and his offering is one of his lambs. And God
But
says
here's
that
the thing.
offering is good.
I wonder if it's very important that it says the firstborn of his flock.
There we go. Now you touched on a point that I want to bring up, that I will continue to bring up throughout this entire podcast, is that Jesus is in every single story of the Bible. Every single one of them, you can find him
Oh, you're
reflected
going
as an
there. Okay.
archetype. But I want to know where you're going with, and then I'm going to jump into a few things.
So I'm just going with the fact that it says it's brought its firstborn, and knowing that obviously this is pretty immediately after paganism, there was a lot of child sacrifice and with firstborns, or basically you offer your most valuable possession
Correct.
to God, and which
Firstborn
is
is a
messed up.
designator of the best, right? This means the
Exactly,
best.
it's the best. So technically, it's not saying whether Cain brought the very first fruit. It's just brought fruit. It doesn't say first
Hmm.
fruit. So maybe that's why. But at the same time, when I then become just look at God just as critically as everyone else, then I'm gonna be like, why you gotta have the best and the most valuable? Like, what's that all about? Why why
Hmm.
why do you have that need to be praised? We know that if you look at the today's modern world, people constantly wanting affirmation and to be unique, to be the best, it's just a cancer on the culture. Like, it's just mental illness. So now God is appearing not very favorable to my eye when it wants your firstborn. And of course, once we get to Abraham, that's I just hate that story. I really hate that story. But
Abraham, yeah, that's a fascinating, strange story. As a lot of the Old Testament is strange, and there's some interesting interpretations of that.
but yeah, let's
But
not jump to Abraham. I know I
yeah, let's not jump
brought
there
it there,
yet. Let's not get
but
there
yeah.
yet.
So
But
let
you're
me
you're touching on the point, which is a traditional interpretation of the story, that
exactly.
Abel offered the best to God, Cain did not, and that Abel did that because he loved God. And when you love someone, you want to give them the best you have, right? If your
Okay.
spouse, gives you a gift and it's junk, then you don't feel loved by your spouse. And so the
Okay.
interpretation is that Cain didn't offer the best, while Abel did offer the best. So Abel was showing that he loved God, while Cain was just doing it as an obligation, like, hey, it's your birthday, here you go, here's some fruit I found on the ground for you, right? So,
Yeah.
and because of that, God was not satisfied with Cain's, unenthusiastic gift, but was satisfied and thanked with Abel's gift. I think you got disconnected here.
A
So
spam
where
call
were we?
interrupted the podcast.
That
That's
was that
great.
was Satan trying to interrupt
That was
everything.
Satan.
Because we're
So you were talking about, let's see. Actually, what you were talking about is very, very interesting because, see, like, I didn't go there because right now I'm looking at it. I'm looking at God extremely critically. But you're saying
mm,
that this is about, which completely shifts the entire perspective. You're saying that it's not necessarily about God wanting necessarily the best. It's about you should be willing to give your best to your loved ones, which is really
exactly.
really true because it's it's like the same as if, like, let's say you cooked food and you put the best on your plate instead of giving it to your guest. Like, Armenians are taught to give the best to the guest.
Hmm. And
So
your
that's
food
very interesting.
analogy is perfect because that is how sacrifices are done. Most people in the West and modern world, we think sacrifice means killing something. Well, how could Cain have sacrificed his tomatoes? He cut them in half, right? But what sacrifice is actually offering food to your God. So you bring your food to your God, and the way they actually did is they would burn the food, and by burning it, they saw the fire as God consuming the food. And so sacrifice, the ritual of sacrifice, is a shared meal. And as you see in the
Yeah.
text here, Abel, not only did he bring one of his lambs, he brought the firstborn, which is the best lamb he had, and it says he separated out the fat portions. Now, as we all know, the fatty bits of meat are the tastiest. They've got the best flavor to them, right? And so he
To
gave the
some.
not only the best lamb, unless you're a texture person and you hate the way fat feels, but
Yeah, yeah.
right. But fat is described and is used as a way of describing the tastiest portions of the animal. So what Abel did was gave God the best part of the meal to God, right? But when we go back to Cain, there's no description whatsoever of Cain giving whether the best or the worst or anything. He just says he just, gave some of his fruit, from the ground. And so that's the delineation there is clearly saying that Abel was giving the best to God. And the interpretation that's normally taught is that this is because Abel loved God. And as we read through this, it kind of shows that a bit more. And Cain didn't. His heart wasn't aligned with his sacrifice, with his offer. The
That's,
sacrifice is a gift.
yeah.
It's saying, this is yours, God.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because if you
Hmm.
then strip away the part where, you know, if you stop looking at the fact that God is being needy, it's yeah, it is deeply profound because that is true. It's very funny that I never even thought of it that way because that has been my big criticism of the new culture these days, that people don't seem to go the mile for the other person or give the best to the other person. They keep the best for themselves and give the
Hmm.
scraps or pull something together just for the show for the other person. And that is truly very far off from the moral teachings that I think I think this is where this also connects to, again, the fact that culturally, due to our persecution, Armenians, I think, have remained very conservative, very ancient practice. So, and hence I've noticed that disconnect where I'm like, interesting, why is Christianity so different? Let's say, how can in one culture or multiple culture in that region, Greece, Armenia, Serbs, like they just, we can get together in a room, we can see the shared values. But then oftentimes, and I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing, but oftentimes in the West, I feel like something has desensitized, disconnected. Something has become a little bit further apart. So it's become more of a show. And I really don't like that I'm going here, but it is something I've noticed a lot. That it's sometimes, not all, obviously, not all. Sometimes it's recited without the practice. And that has, I think that's exactly what has stirred so many people away from Christianity or from the church practices, because people see a certain type of a hypocrisy.
Yes, this is a story right here, right? There's a hypocrisy. Cain is giving his gift to God, but he doesn't actually believe in it, right? He's just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's doing it for selfish reasons. He's like, well, I got to give this to God to get something back from God. But Abel's
Yeah.
offering the best parts, right? Which means that whatever he gets back from God isn't going to be the best. He already gave it to God, saying, "This is
Mm-hmm.
yours, right? I want you to have the best. Whatever you give to me is fine, but you get the best." And so that is a loving relationship with the Creator, as opposed to Cain's unloving, right? A transactional relation. So one is more
Mm-hmm.
of a familial, like a son and a father, right? Or brothers and sisters. The other one's more corporate. I give you this, you give me that, right?
Yeah.
And we
Yeah. It's
see
very
that
interesting.
we see that when we break into the meaning of their actual names. Like Cain's name actually means uh, to acquire or forge together or spear, right? It's to gather,
Mm.
to get. It's even a play on the words when Eve says, I have acquired a son from the Lord, right? Well, Abel's
Mm-hmm.
name actually means like vapor or breath, right? Or emptiness,
Mm-hmm.
which is words that describe spirit, right? Spirituality, spirit, how you feel about something. So
Interesting.
Cain is like the
Yeah.
masculine, you know, logical, this or that, while Abel is more about spirit. And so even in their names, you have that same interplay going on in the story,
Hmm.
like the mind versus the heart.
Got it. Very interesting. You said the word corporate, and I had a thing in like a moment because that also that also describes what I was trying to describe, because I really don't want it to sound like I'm comparing cultures or this and that. But I think that the word corporate, if we look at the American empire, has become like this giant corporation, this empire that makes me wonder, even if you go back in time when it comes to Roman Catholics or Roman Empire, like, can true spirituality and true moral values truly remain intact in that corporatized world, in a way? Like, or is it always going to have to stir away a little bit to become more of a control base? What am I trying to say? So people sounding more hypocritical or repeating without understanding, and then yet again the cycle starts and they connect to that source, and then disconnect again. Or I don't know if I'm being coherent. There's something happening in my mind that I don't think I'm being able to articulate properly. But
I mean, you can create an analogy to pure financial, monetarily motivated capitalism in the sense of everyone's just out to get for themselves, which is usually a typical critique of capitalism or the economy. But just because you trade doesn't mean you can't actually love and give gifts and do things with the heart, with the right heart, right? And we'll
but
actually
doesn't it
see
create a
in
little bit of a selfishness and greed, which starts focusing on yourself rather than others?
it can, right? It depends on your strength. I mean, there are plenty of loving people who exist in a world where we trade and buy and sell, who'd be perfectly willing to
True.
give it all up in order to help someone else. That's why charities exist, right?
To be clear, I'm a hardcore capitalist. I,
Yeah,
I know I'm speaking from the opposite end, but
to the viewers, I am as well. But you have to understand that there's a mix of both the logical and the spiritual, the mind and the heart. Capitalism, financial trading, that's all physical. But you also have to have good heart involved in society. You have to have a good spirituality within the ethos.
but then in the cycles of history, we might see that it would be wonderful world. It would be true capitalism if that heart remained, right? Because then you wouldn't be greedy and capitalism would not be forced to become corporatism or technocracy or anything else. Currently, I can argue that US is no longer a capitalist state almost. It's more of a corporatism. What's the word? It's become more corporatist for sure and now technocratic as we keep
Right.
improving our technology. But if people were not so greedy and they truly just kept that heart, that moral value intact, then perhaps there would be no need for some social justice pink-haired people, starting screaming, divide the wealth or whatever, which is a premise I don't agree with, but I also kind of understand where that stems from.
Right, right. I mean, there's perfectly legitimate criticisms of the capitalist system, right? The question isn't the criticisms; it's the proposed solutions to those criticisms, right? And that's
Oh yeah,
that's where that's where it all comes together to a head. And you hit the nail on the head there, where it's the problem with and I don't we're going off into political philosophy here, but the problem that what
well, I
people
mean,
do
it's
is
it's it's not far off because it's all based on people losing lack of moral sight. So then,
yeah,
of course,
you're
everything
100%
becomes where
right.
it's yeah.
Yeah, you're 100% right because this story actually is about that issue, right? And
Yeah.
honestly, it's the same story repeated in every single story in the Bible. It's just the same as we talked about at the beginning. It's these patterns repeating over and over again. And so, what we'll end up seeing in this story is a solution to that answer, which is the path to union with God, to a peaceful society, is through the heart. It's through actually loving your neighbor, right, and not just seeing them as a means to an end. And the issue
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people, Marxists and socialists have is they think that, well, if we just get rid of the system, then people will naturally love each other. But what we know from human nature is that first people have to love each other. And only once people fully love each other, they see each other as God, right? As themselves. Only
Mm-hmm.
then can that system disintegrate. And then you can all share in unison because you are all working together as one cohesive unit. But you can't just eliminate the capitalist structure and think people are just going to magically hold hands and sing kumbaya.
Well,
We know that.
for
And
sure,
that's the
for
issue.
sure.
So the moral of the story that we're going to see is that you got to start with the heart. And but that's the story
we
of
we gotta
Christianity
we gotta
itself.
start with yourself, where in those same stories of Marxism and people wanting that is still outward facing. It's just focusing on
Right.
what you want others to do. You're not thinking
And
about this. Reminded me. Uh-huh.
this is Cain. Cain was angry that his brother got the love, even though he felt that he should have gotten the same thing, right? And so he wanted to redistribute God's love.
Yeah, a friend of mine once told me this interesting story. James, he said that he had a person in his investment club that just drives this really old diesel truck that's just really like even while he drives away, you can just see what it's doing to the air, polluting the air. And this guy is a hardcore climate change type of person. So then James one time said, dude, like, why you're talking about climate change all the time and like being radical about what I should do or what anybody should do. And you look at the truck you're driving, and the guy's like, well, I mean, it's no use if I just change the truck now. Like, once everybody changes, then I'll change.
There we go.
Such a...
Yeah. Once everyone else does it, then I'll do it. Or you could lead by
Yeah.
example. You could, as Gandhi's known for saying, be the change you want to
Exactly.
see in the world, which is
It's
literally
outward.
a Christian lesson. Is at first you connect with God, because if you're not connected with God, how the hell are you going to lead other people to the right path? You got to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Or else you're the blind leading the blind. So
Yes. All right, so let's continue this. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Oh, that was quick. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. So as in nobody should attack him, right? This old English can throw me off sometimes. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. Let's stop there for a moment, or should we continue and finish?
No, that's a good place to stop. I mean, there's
Okay.
not much left unless you want to finish. We can just finish and
No,
then go
no,
back.
it's okay. Let's stop there for a moment, because not to forget where we started. So Cain basically kills Abel, and now he's freaking out because he realizes that he's not going to be able to do the farming because he's not going to have luck with that anymore. He's been cursed. And also he thinks he's going to die or be killed, but God actually decided that he's not going to be killed. He puts a mark on him so that he just doesn't die. Right? Am I reading that correctly?
Essentially, he puts a mark on him that anyone who attacks him is going to get avenged sevenfold. Basically, he's protecting Cain from
So he's
death.
protected. Yeah, Cain is protected.
Right.
Okay. And then he just goes on and starts conceiving children. Whew. Okay. So, all right. So obviously he kills. Then hard to tell if he understands what he's really done. It looks like he's still self-involved. He's still more worried about himself and the punishment he's receiving. And God decides to protect him. So on that note, like I don't have a criticism of God there, because when people commit horrendous crime, I actually think they should be punished in a way where they get to understand what they've done, rather than just either be killed or just shoved in prison. Like it's gonna sound terrible. They should be probably tortured and punished a little bit differently.
All right, let's
But
edit that part out.
no, why? I believe that. I believe people who, let's say, a child molester should fully understand what they've done, and should not be easy. Should not just be easy as like, oh, here, go to jail and eat for the rest of your life for free, and just the punishment is being inside a cell. What if he's an introvert and is perfectly fine there? There got to be a good punishment. So Cain is getting the kind of punishment I would have given. Minus, I don't know if I would just let him go and do the things.
Well, I think one thing I want to point out that I think is kind of fun in the poetry of this in verse 8, where it says, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother, Abel, and killed him. So it repeats the word his brother over and over. And the point of that is it's really
Mm-hmm.
emphasizing like this is a big deal. Who kills their own brother? Like it keeps saying, like when you're telling a story, like
Yeah.
this guy took my wallet. He took my wallet, right? You emphasize it to make a point about how big a deal this is, right? So Cain, and this is a
Yeah.
huge deal. His own brother, he kills him,
Obviously.
um, and he doesn't just kill him; he lures him to his death. He says, "Hey, let's go out into the field."
Mm-hmm.
And I think I love the poetry in the way it says, "Your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." Right now, you're
Yeah.
cursed from the ground. Right, and so what does that
Yeah.
say there? Because oftentimes we see these stories as someone does something and then God punishes them. But the
Mm-hmm.
traditional interpretation is more of action and consequence, right? That this world, there's consequences to your actions. And so, when it says, and now you're cursed from the ground, which has opened up its mouth to receive your brother's blood. And now when you work the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. So what God's saying is that because your brother's blood is in the ground, it's that which is cursing you, right? It's not that
Mm-hmm.
I'm cursing you, right? But because you put your brother's blood into the ground, that is a consequence of your action, is that now
So it's
life is
gonna
going to
come
be even
haunt
more
you.
difficult. Right, right. So it's not even God saying, now I'm going to punish you. It's like, this is the natural consequence of action. Every action has a consequence, and this is that consequence. And it's also interesting how the word blood is actually properly read as bloods, like plural,
Mm-hmm.
because to kill someone is to kill their entire bloodline, right? When someone's
Yeah.
alive, they have potential to have kids, and then their kids have kids, and then who knows how many generations that person can provide. But if
It
they're
could have
killed
been a
before
start
then,
of a nation. Yeah.
exactly, exactly, and we'll see that God actually uh, um, fixes this in the next few verses. But that's why, if you kill one man, you kill the whole world. That's a saying, is because you're destroying an entire infinite, near infinite lineage of people by one person's death. But I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to point out that it's the blood of his brother that's cursing the ground for Cain. It's not God himself. It's a consequence. And
But it's interesting because um, one can one can be truly cursed and understand and be haunted and like learn the lessons if they understand what they've done. But Cain doesn't. God tests Cain, right? Because he says, technically, if he's God, he definitely knows where Cain is or where
right, of
Abel
course,
is. But he tests Cain and says, "Where is your brother?" And Cain says, "I don't know. Am I his keeper?" Right? Because it's just yet another test to just be like, is he going to like come clean and at least be honest about this, or is he just a complete imbecile? And then he proves to be a complete imbecile.
exactly. God. This is God giving Cain an opportunity to repent, to say,
Yeah.
what have I done? I'm so sorry. Just like when God approached Adam and Eve in the garden and said, "Did you eat of the fruit?" And then they blamed
Yeah.
God for it. They said, "No, it's your fault. You're the one who gave me this woman, and this woman talked to the snake, so it's your fault." They didn't take
Well,
any
and then
responsibility
Adam
for it.
Adam throws the woman straight under the
Yeah,
bus too. Like it's
yeah,
like, Eve, you did it.
yeah. She did it, and then you made her. So technically, it's your fault. Which is the
I'm
story
clean.
here.
Yeah.
The saints and teach that if you hate even one person, you're far away from the kingdom of God. Is that if you, it the story about not taking responsibility. If you say that it's God's fault that you did what you did, right? If you say that it's
Mm-hmm.
someone else's fault, then you're not taking responsibility, and you don't have the ability to heal from that. Because you're saying, well, God, it's God's fault, therefore God's evil, and how can you exist with under an evil God? Um, it's Cain's repeating the same mistake of his father, who was also a
Mm-hmm.
gardener just like him. You know.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Shall we finish this chapter?
Sure. Yeah. So Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built the city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Erad, and Erad fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took two wives. The name of one was Ada, the name of the other was Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in the tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who played the lyre and pipe. Zilal also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, should we continue? Yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, I
Lamech
think
said
let's
to his
finish because it's
wives,
only little.
Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, and a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold, or in some translations, 70 times sevenfold.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called him Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. And to Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord.
Okay. So it's interesting. So many things here. So one, okay, that's right. Cain and Abel's story doesn't end here as far as Cain going and doing the things. So I won't finish my prior point. But what's interesting here is through this entire process, they really just do not say anything about Adam and Eve as parents. Hey, what'd you do? Where's your brother? Let me kill you now.
Right.
The what's interesting here that stands out in ancient times, people would. I think this is perhaps first time that God decides that He's going to cast a judgment on Cain rather than just handing it to his family to punish him. Because if we think about the Babylonian or pagan or Mesopotamian punishment styles, let's say if you go and kill somebody, then you would be handed to that family to decide what to do with you. And if they just killed you, then it's justice. So this is different because he's actually getting protected and marked not to be killed by others. And of course, a little bit of a semantics that doesn't, it's not important technically, but at the same time, this is supposed to be the first few people, and then yet it's talking about how he's worried about people killing him, but obviously, there shouldn't be that many people around. There shouldn't be people to kill him, right? But there was another point that I was going to make. So
it depends on, if a super literalist will say, and very few people actually carry this, especially in the ancient traditions, that, all of the people on earth at this point were the children of Adam and Eve, and, brothers and sisters, and they just kept producing people. More of a realistic, and semi-literalist, but not completely, metaphorical, would be that Adam and Eve are existing in a world of people already, right? And so this is a lineage of people who were kicked out, or who were sent out. I'll say that's a better way, from the Garden of Eden and placed into a world of pre-existing people. Either way, you can interpret it however you want.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be very clear. Anytime I'm being retardedly literal, I'm trying to be funny. I'm trying to be funny because to me, every time I hear atheists making their points, it just sounds so idiotic to me, because they truly hang on to like, oh, well, it said this, but then they're not putting it in context of history that is talking about human condition, mankind, how it was ancient times versus now versus whatever. So I will sometimes poke fun on those literal details just for fun, but obviously I don't believe that it's talking about there's literally just 3 people now alive. And it's not talking about just those 3 people.
And the literalists, I mean, they have their explanations. There are other people who were born from Adam and Eve, and they had perfect DNA, and incest wasn't necessarily banned yet. And I don't think it's a discussion we really need to have, but you don't have to interpret it that way for this to still have meaning, to still make sense. You don't have to interpret it exactly the way that the Super Baptist fundamentalist type of people do.
Oh, they actually go that literal?
Yeah. The young Earth creationists go extremely literal. And that's what a lot of the atheists will say, oh, well, if that doesn't make any sense, therefore the whole Bible doesn't make any sense. But,
So they
It's a
become
straw
a
man because they're
quick
attacking the
prey.
weakest argument. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because here's the thing: the young what is it, creationists, they calculate the Earth to be 10,000 years old or something. While that's not my view, because I do believe in our scientific endeavors, I from that, just purely that perspective, I don't actually, they can make a pretty good argument, because we don't know. We sometimes think we know a lot, and then one day we just realize, oh, we actually didn't know crap about that, right? So to make an argument about the vastness of universe and stuff, it's just, to me, someone else who's more literal can make the argument that had it's all
Right.
hypothetical, right?
Right.
So I'm inclined to be more hypothetical, and just I would like to believe that theory, right, versus this theory. But to me, they automatically don't become like someone I can dismiss. If they said the Earth is only 2,000 years old, because I've heard that before, someone dumb enough to think that just the however old the Bible states Jesus is is like how old the Earth is. It's just like, what? That has happened only once in my life, but I was young enough where I was just like, just really, it made an impact, because I was just like, if this is how you believe, then I don't want to have anything to do with that, you know?
It does scare a lot of people off. And you have a very good point though, that to say, oh, our scientific understanding is the be all end all of all understanding of reality. And of course, we're going to learn new things. And so, hypothetically speaking, God is all powerful. You can't say what God can't do, because God can do whatever you want to do. But I think the more important point here is that we don't read these stories. These stories weren't written down and told for generations as some sort of scientific text. They were told as ways to describe a morals of God, a way to connect with God and understand God's relation. So it's the metaphorical or the metaphysical or the moralistic kind of understanding you pull out of it. That's first. That's what's important. Um, and in fact, even in the story here, you see it's Abel who loved God was able to connect with God, right? And Cain
Yeah.
who tried to rationalize God,
And when you're saying
who
connect with
lost his
God,
connection.
you're really, sounds like you're really meaning connect to the moral compass, right?
Right.
Because technically that's what technically that's what it's about. It's about the human nature and not being astray from your moral compass.
From God's moral compass, because God is the ultimate good, and therefore to connect with Him would be to be able to be good in this world, right? And so, people can argue about literal interpretations all they want, which are fun. I mean, they're fun to do. But first, let's love God and make sure we get that right, and then we can discuss the rest of it, just like this story is telling us. Because
Yes,
you'll
I think
see
that's
people
where.
all the time. Someone will love God with all their heart, and then someone will say, "Oh, but your interpretation of this is wrong," and then they'll start to hate them and get angry at them because they have a wrong interpretation. That is this story right here. That is Cain and Abel. So,
See, here, let me see if I can make a point there. So here's where I think some people become like love God, right? Because then we're presented that God is a humanoid image of ourselves. Then so many people are like, who is this guy? Like, you just keep saying God, love him, love God, and that there's a problem there. The way to a lot of people, and to an extent me, because then I'm gonna have to just go into the never-ending cycle of what is God and who is God, right? Because let's say if I reject the premise that it's a humanoid character, then where I think we miss something in my opinion in Christianity is we focus sometimes on the wrong verbiage in my opinion, because you can be absolutely a type of good human being that God would absolutely approve of, right? You have your moral compass straight. You are a non-sinning, highly aware, conscious human being doing your best. Like let's say someone truly righteous. Obviously, God is not going to punish you if you do not have a particular name for God or a character or a visual of God, right? Because God then just becomes that moral compass itself, not someone to love in a human sense. It's just more loving humanity in general to be able to understand your correct spot in it and not over amplify your ego, not see yourself as above or below others, but just the correct spot in that universe. Yeah, something like when people say, like, let's say, obviously I'm in Tennessee, so there's so many very very, very religious people. And I am Christian and I do believe in God. But I start disassociating when I start hearing their version of, like this sureness about referring to him and naming him. I don't know. It's a little bit. I definitely have
So
a.
no, you're on a very good track here, and I think this story helps shed light to how to look at God here. Um, we're made in the image of God, and therefore our capacities with reality are capacities that God shares. Right, our ability to have a mental capacity, our ability to have a spiritual, emotional capacity, physical, being able to make choices. Right, and if we look at the story as Cain being, he's a tiller of the earth, and in symbology, earth represents masculine energy, right? Structure, order. And
Mm-hmm,
Cain's or Abel's name is breath, vapor, emptiness. That represents
mm-hmm.
spirituality, right? So the feminine
Yeah.
aspect. And
Okay.
it is right. And so it is Abel who, through his feminine aspect, spirit, loved God, while Cain tried to conceptualize God and just do what logically made sense, while Abel actually built a spiritual connection. What you're saying about loving God as if he's a person, is that what you were kind of saying, or not understanding what
I
that
was
means?
saying, no, I'm saying, I think it throws everything off for those people who are actually good. They do believe that you should follow this moral compass. They do strive to be righteous. They truly do love humanity and love others more than themselves. They do give their best to their family members and sacrifice themselves in that way.
Mm,
Like truly good, righteous people oftentimes by Christian standards might be like, well, you're not really Christian because you might
gotcha.
not say Jesus is Lord and shining armor. I don't know. So
No, yeah, you're exactly right. So a lot of Christians, especially if they go to seminary and they finally start reading the early church fathers, like the first Christians, and they'll start looking for what they're normally taught Christianity is, which is believing a certain story is true and saying a certain prayer. And they start reading the early church fathers in the first 100 years and second 100 years and first 500 years, and they start not seeing them saying anything like that, because Christianity has always been about theosis, about uniting with God. Gnosticism, which traditionally is seen as the enemy of Christianity, the word gnosis means knowledge, and one of the
mhm.
ways that Gnosticism um, teaches is that you need special knowledge to get to God. You need to know something. You need to know that a certain thing is true, like a certain story, and that's what
Doesn't that
connects you to
mean
God.
instinctively, which sounds a lot closer to Christianity or what Jesus was teaching, right? To defend the Gnostics for a moment there. Because here's the thing, I would prefer if Christians, as a person who's new to this, just already have dabbled into it for multiple years now, so still very new, but I would, after reading all that I've read so far, which doesn't end there, I'm sure it will change. I would prefer if Christians just forgot about all the church fathers and all the writings, include they just took the Gospel of Mark and like just looked at what Jesus is teaching. That's it. Just what Jesus is teaching,
And right, I think the point
not
here
what
is
other
that
people are saying what Jesus was teaching.
right. Right. No, well, and I think what the point you're trying to make is ultimately ends in the question that everyone asks, especially when they're young, is what about the people who never heard of Jesus? Are they damned to hell just because they never heard the story? That's most people who've ever
No,
existed,
not even that.
right?
What if they've heard the story, but they have a problem seeing God? Here's the
Sure,
thing, highly
exactly.
spiritual people, right? I'm going to consider myself as one of those, right? Since I was little, I had a particular relationship with a source of energy I cannot explain. So here I sound crazy. But it feels like my prayers are answered. It feels like I am perfectly guided where I should go and what I should do. And anytime I do follow that path, I am truly rewarded in many ways. And then humbled if I ever decide I am a little bit better than something, right? If I let my ego shine a little bit, I'm humbled and then right back up. So there's been that battle with spirituality with me when without a doubt, I've never doubted that voice inside me. That voice inside me, I attribute to Christianity because that is the moral compass that I was born and raised with, right? I think the culture has I respect my culture a lot because it truly teaches these moral values and beats it into you in a sense, right? It doesn't allow you to slip. It doesn't allow you to just be like, oh, it's a child, let him grow however, it's just his own person. No, I'm gonna be the guidance to tell you what's right and what's wrong, and I'm gonna punish you if you do wrong. So it's it's a type of a culture that instills that, makes it as part of your identity. And so hence my spirituality is connected to that Christianity, which when I now read and see is highly connected with the moral values Jesus was teaching. But everything else, like the church fathers coming and saying, if you don't believe in Trinity, then you're going to rot in hell, and all this stuff just becomes like, what? It just becomes like somebody wanted to gain control over people and create a way to have people follow a specific type of story. And maybe it was necessary. Maybe because of human nature, that's necessary. I'm not, I've criticized Catholics a lot for because I see sometimes the Catholic Church as that power grabbing entity. But at the same time, if it wasn't for Catholic Church, potentially Islam would have wiped the world. So I am very thankful from that perspective, right? So, but it is a battle. Like, I have that inner voice, inner compass, but then some people who read some church fathers who decided they understand the book way better than other people, or they understood Jesus way better than other people, all of a sudden, you're on the wrong path all of a sudden.
Well,
Forget what
the
you're doing,
solution,
right?
yeah, the solutions here in this story, and I brought up the church fathers because early church tradition was not about, oh, if you don't believe this exactly, you burn in hell. It was all about uniting with God. And this story, the moral of this story is that God accepts the offering that comes from love, right? And he rejects the offering, even if it was done correctly, if it didn't come from a place of love, right? So
It's
it's
coming
about,
through a manipulation of some sort, like trying to
right.
fool you.
Exactly. So to unite with God is to first come to God from a place of love, right? A place of
Yeah,
gratitude
that
where
I can
you're
agree with.
thankful for what you have, and then you're loving back, and you love God and love your neighbor. And that's the lesson that's taught repeatedly in these stories in the Bible over and over and over again, culminating with Jesus, who said, "You all wash the outside of the cup, but you leave the inside filthy."
Yeah.
You're all worried about making sure you do the right thing at the exact right time, but your heart is full of evil thoughts and evil feelings, right? And we come back to Cain and Abel. God loves the person who comes to God with love and gratitude and wants to unite, rather than coming to God as if he's a Santa Claus that's just going to give him things, or coming resentful. And God even gives Cain an opportunity to change, repent. He said, "Hey, what have you done?" And he even warns him. He says, "Sin is crouching basically at your door. Sin is about to get you. It wants you to do something that isn't in your nature. If you don't turn now, you're going to do something very, very bad." Right? He even warned
Yeah.
Cain, and Cain disregarded that, felt that anger. His countenance, his face fell, united with that spirit, and that spirit killed Abel. Right? And this story of two brothers, and we'll see it as we go through the Bible, because Cain and Abel were actually twins in this story, is seen
Yeah.
repeated over and over again. In
I guess, wait, no, it does say she had. Wait, now I have to check that real quick. Because that doesn't it
it's
say she had. Huh?
it's traditionally interpreted as being twins because it only says she conceived once and then bore each. So when it says, now Adam knew his wife,
I see.
right?
Because she says, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord, and again she bore his brother Abel.
Right.
So
There's
it
no
doesn't say she
conception between the
conceived
two of them.
again.
Right. And so we see this story repeated in the rest of the Old Testament of two brothers being born, and the eldest being basically cursed in the sense, and the youngest connecting with God and having a fight here. And you even see this pattern repeated in the founding of Rome in the mythology of Roman mythology with Romulus and Remus, who were two twin brothers who fought over
Oh,
which
yeah.
mountain to build a city on. And then Romulus killed Remus, and hence the city of Rome. And that
That's,
story there, I think, metaphysically provides evidence of Christianity being true, because eventually, um, as in all of these stories in the Bible, the younger brother who is blessed by God overcomes the older brother. So let's back up here real quick, because we're coming up, I think, on an hour, and I don't want to go overboard too much, right?
that's fine. There's only one more thing I want to say about this chapter. So it's clear that as they're moving forward and having more kids, and society is thriving, or not thriving, but increasing in size, it says, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. So Lamech has two wives. So there's polygamy here, which obviously Adam and Eve are not like that. So this is the first time I think it's mentioning that. And I'm not sure if it mentions again, I don't recall in Genesis another version, any other polygamy stories, but this is definitely polygamous. But also he seems to, let's say, if you contrast Cain versus this guy, Lamech, Cain is freaked out because he's punished now and he's just wondering what's going to happen. Whereas this guy here is actually boasting, kind of
Exactly.
like he's kind of is playful to him. He actually killed someone for sport because they just said something. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. So somebody just hit him and he killed him, right? That's what it sounds like. So he just kind of killed for sport, and then he's bragging about it.
Yeah. And young man basically means like young teenager. Like he's not only bragging about killing a man, he's bragging about killing a kid, you know? And then on top of that, he declares his own protection. He says, God protected Cain sevenfold. Well, he'll protect me 70 times sevenfold. He's saying that Cain's revenge, right? If anyone harms him, is sevenfold. Lamech is saying that his is even greater. It's 70 times seven. Because he's just boasting about how great he is. He's so great. He kills people just because for fun, and anyone who harms him will be harmed even more than Cain. It's a depiction of someone who's, the child of Cain, right? You're going to get worse. This is even worse than Cain. And there's an interesting connection here to the New Testament. I think it's in Matthew, when people ask Jesus, how many times should we forgive those who wrong us? 7, and they say 7 times, which is calling back to Cain's right here. And what does Jesus say? He says, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Even someone as evil as Lamech, right? If he's willing to change, you should forgive, right? He's calling directly back to this story. And the Jews around him would know exactly what he's talking about.
Okay, so I think yeah, this is a good place to perhaps.
Yeah. There's a couple more things I wanted to say, and then we can wrap up.
Okay.
That's all right. After this, they had Seth. And the name for Seth means like to sit. Same root as the word sit, to sit down on your butt, to place something, right? Or like you sit on the throne, it's to put something in position. It can also be kind of interpreted as, like, I've heard, replacement, But the idea here, and it says in the very last verse, is that Seth's lineage after him began to call upon the name of the Lord, right? So this is in direct contrast to the lineage of Cain, right? Cain's children, right, are boasting about killing people. His lineage is becoming evil, right? But Seth's lineage is becoming good. They're connecting with God. And this eventually culminates in the story of Noah, right, which we'll get to eventually here.
Obviously, besides these lineages, there's a lot more people being born that isn't talked about, because technically it just seems like all men. So where are the women begotten these people? So, but
pregnant men, hey, it's 2025. We can have pregnant men now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll touch on just a little bit of that. There's some interesting
Okay.
meaning of the names, and I have it
Okay.
written down here, some meaning of these names, which we don't have to go into, but it is interesting sometimes when you dive into, because these names aren't just words, they're actually, or just random sounds. They're actually words that mean something. Like, for instance, Mehujael means destroyer of God. The word, anytime you see El, the word El
Uh-huh.
is both in ancient, the ancient languages means God. It's the definitive,
God,
same as
El.
the word in Spanish, like El carro, right? The car, right?
Mm-hmm.
The definitive there.
D. Yeah.
And so anytime you see El, that means God. So Israel, right? Or Methushael means man of God, or Mehujael
Mm.
means destroyer of God. So there's stories that are actually kind of built into these names, and you can understand what kind of people they are, or at least the principle that they represent, just based on their name here. Which is why naming somebody is so important in the story of the Bible. If someone gives you a new name, they're giving you a new identity, a new person who you are.
So Israel is destroyer of God. I'm kidding, but
No.
I
Well, it's he
was.
who fights God, who wrestles with God. So it depends on how you interpret. Are you wrestling for fun? Or are
Um,
you fighting?
it's interesting. I was wondering the other day if is Ra El is like multiple things connecting, because Ra was God, right? Ra was the
Mm-hmm.
sun god, I believe, in ancient times. Is Isis was another character. So then it's like is Ra, and El was the later god, right? There's the
Mm-hmm.
pagan god, and then later I think it wasn't Jewish god El, and then Yahweh later.
It just depends on how he's referenced. It's like kind of the difference between saying God and then saying the name of God, Yahweh, right? Like you're saying the same thing, just one is specific and one's just kind of a general term
No,
for
I know. I'm just
for God.
wondering
Yeah,
if Israel is just the combining all the prior gods
right.
and all the way till now. So just connecting all the gods together in a way, like becomes just there's one God. It's all the same. Israel.
And
It's just
you see a
I don't know.
lot.
It just
Yeah, I've seen people describe that as Isis, Ra, and then El, put together. And I don't know if the historical accuracy of that is, but it's a kind of a fun little thing. But if you're going to do that, then you have the Trinity right there, right? You have the feminine, and then the Son, and then the Father, basically in that name. If you're going to break it
I see
apart
it
like that.
more in a way that it really I see it in a way that it's so silly to for people to say, well, my God or this God or that God, this is not the true God. And it's just because there's just God. You either connect with that or you don't.
Yeah. Well, and in ancient times, and this is even true in Eastern Christianity, you have to understand that the God that you believe in is the God that you follow, which means that you represent his character, right? And so all the ancient religions had a pantheon, but they always had a top god. Like this character then creates these other gods and these other characters and these other personalities, and you can bond and unite with these different personalities, or the top one, and whoever you decide is the top god, the god of the gods, which is a phrase repeated in the Bible of what Yahweh is, the God of the gods. They'll say that, I mean, all the gods exist. Like all the potentials of characters and possibilities of beings are out there in the ether of reality. But who is your God? Who is the God that creates an eternity that never dies? Would be the one that creates and the one that loves his creation. But one that creates and one that destroys his creation isn't going to last forever. But that's a deeply metaphysical discussion there. But I will say that in the Eastern tradition, I mean, you'll hear people say, yeah, of course, all the gods exist, and we are gods as well, right? We are characters as well. But there's a certain pattern with relationship to a particular god, a particular character, that determines whether or not we are loving and good and create a better world, or whether we become demons.
Yeah.